Hello and welcome to the Edition podcast. I'm your host, Charlotte Henry, and I'm joined this week by my very good friend, teacher, academic, author, writer of One Man and His Blog, Adam Tinworth. Hello, Adam.
Hello, Charles. How are you?
I'm good. Did I miss out anything from the introduction? Did I add anything?
I think that'll do for now.
Very good. Right, yes, check out onemanandhisblog.com, if only because the name keeps us in a certain distinct part of British television history, which I suspect that many of my listeners will recognise now. Forgive me for saying.
It was a joke that I thought was funny 20 years ago, but when you have to try and explain to a bunch of Singaporean journalists what One Man and His Dog was, and they look at you like, the British are clearly mad.
Which is not an unreasonable conclusion to come to.
And that's fair. And I'd forgotten actually One Man and His Dog still recurs once a year on a Country File.
Does it?
Yes, they still do it periodically.
We've thoroughly confused my American listeners now. So welcome. Luckily, we're going to talk on something a bit more modern, which is AI. Obviously, because there's so much discussion in the journalism space about AI. But you have saved us all, because there are a lot of journalists that are worried about the consequences of AI in a newsroom, in the wider media environment. But you've come up with a manifesto, and you humbly called it Report and Connect, a manifesto for the survival of journalism in the AI age. It's a fascinating read. So go on then, how are you going to save us all?
No, I'm not going to say where it would be. But if people think about what journalism actually is, rather than what they sometimes perceive it as being, then we've got an opportunity. I suppose the root of this is a sort of a long-held theory about what journalism is or should be, which is existing in service of a community. So, journalism is not an abstract art. It's not the sort of thing that you can be a journalist and starve in a garret and then people find your journalism in 50 years and then suddenly you become a celebrated journalist. It's something
it's happened.
Real time for an audience. Well, yeah, people starve in garrets, but their journalism rarely gets discovered 50 years later.
No, that's true.
And that's true. The core problem. Unlike the sort of the abstract thing of art, journalism is a service performed for an audience. And at some level, we've managed to, or at least sections of the industry have sort of abstracted that thought away. And I had a conversation with Joanna Geary, ex-Twitter, now at Bloomberg, years ago about this sort of abstract gods of journalism.
Explain what you mean by that.
The idea that there's sort of like there is the perfect story, there is a brilliant story and that appeases the gods of journalism, even if nobody reads it. And, that's sort of like nobody read the story, but it was a great story. Well, clearly it wasn't. Or it was, but you didn't sell it in the right way or put it in front of the audience in the right way that made them care about it. So, a story only matters if it has an impact on an audience, fundamentally. And this is the core of journalism. It isn't something that exists in isolation, to me, at least.
Yeah, I broadly agree with that. I think you can still write an excellent story and it not get the publicity or public recognition you as the journalist thinks it deserves. I mean, let's be honest, we've all done those stories.
Yes, absolutely. And sometimes you're right, and that it is a great story. It's just that you didn't sell it in the right way, you didn't put it in social at the right time.
Right.
Or just sometimes the rolls of the dice. I mean, there's anybody who's done any level of audience work knows that sometimes everything should be right, it should work, and it just doesn't. And that's just sometimes just bad luck.
Exactly. That's kind of what I'm getting at.
But as an overall principle, journalism that doesn't have an impact on somebody is not really journalism. It's not really useful. It's just and it certainly has to operate in the moment. That's by definition what it is. We all like to tell ourselves we're writing the first draft of history, etc., etc. And so it does absolutely have to exist in the moment and be relevant in the moment. Yeah, irrelevant in the moment, even if it's something that's about events that happened in the past. So I was thinking about that big Observer exclusive about the Salt Path.
Right.
That was their first big notable hit under the Tortoise ownership.
Right, yeah. And where does AI fit into all of this then, which is obviously what prompted you to write your manifesto?
AI fits into this because obviously we have this technology that is likely to be transformative in the way we consume and use information.
Sure.
So,
and produce information.
yes, absolutely. And so to me, it feels like a bit like we did back in sort of 1997, 98-ish, when we were in that sort of first wave. The internet was clearly going to be a big thing, but nobody quite knew what the impact of it was going to be. And to the point that I suspect, and there's been quite a lot of reporting lately about the fact that we may be in something of an economic bubble around AI right now.
As in the companies are too valued, everyone's getting a bit overexcited, we're having a bit of our crypto moment.
Also, a vast amount of the investment is going into a limited number of companies. A vast amount
Sure.
of overall economic investment in America and other places is going into AI and is likely to cause an economic crash if those companies struggle. But that's off to the side. But it feels like we're in that sort of a moment, similar to the dot-com boom 30 years ago nearly, where everything's going to happen. We know it's going to be big. Nobody quite knows how it's going to be big yet. Everybody's trying. There will probably be a retreat from some of the things we're doing right now. But overall, there is a sea change coming.
Yes.
And particularly if you talk to young people, they are so that a usage of AI is so established, it's not going to go away anytime soon. But they're trying to navigate what it actually does.
Is that true? Are people... I don't mean this is a sort of Luddite, naive question, but are young people, and what do you mean by... First of all, do you mean students? Do you mean 12-year-olds?
Well,
are people like... So I know I use ChatGPT sometimes when I want an answer to a question. I have to tell you, often the answer to the question is wrong.
Well, this is the challenge. So, two anecdotes, acknowledging the anecdotes is not data. First of which is my year 2 undergraduates last year.
So we're talking about 22-year-olds?
No, you're probably talking...
Oh, sorry, 19-year-olds,
20-year-olds. Some of them are a bit older because we get some mature students. But yeah, we're talking late teens, early 20s, the very most. And so I actually asked the class how many of them used Google AI overviews regularly.
Right.
And I would say, and remember, this is not a normal class in the nicest possible sense. This is a class full of journalism students who have clawed their way onto a journalism course. But I would say 60% didn't. 60% scrolled straight to the other results. 40% did. But the ones the 40% did, who use them regularly, admitted it. This led to a vigorous exchange of views between the two groups, where I was able to sort of sit back with a metaphorical box of popcorn and enjoy this for 5 minutes before stepping in and reasserting control over the class. So, yeah, they're using it. Equally, my daughters, who are 10 and 13, will routinely check the overviews, but they have learned to be sceptical.
Right.
I think we recently watched the Hobbit movies with them, and one of them looked up, before we got to the end of the movies, what happened to Fili and Thundriel, or whatever her name is, the female elf they added. And when she discovered that AI overviews suggested they retired together to Barbados, she came to the conclusion this probably wasn't true, and they've now got into a competition about finding the most ridiculous use of AI overviews they can, or most ridiculously inaccurate thing. So, yeah, they are clearly using it, but they are also, to some degree, a little bit more sceptical about them than maybe older people are, which is encouraging. Older people are more... you hear sometimes of people planning their holiday trips and trying to find their way to a valley in the Chilean mountains that doesn't exist. Those sort of problems. Yeah,
I mean, forgive me, but I think those people sort of bring that on themselves. But yeah...
not disagreeing.
No, I'm not an AI... I say this every time I discuss this. I am not an AI Luddite. There are huge numbers of things it's going to have an impact on. Particularly, I know people obviously talk about generative AI as well, where it starts, taking on human-like qualities of intelligence and teaching itself and so on and so forth. So I agree with your premise that this is a key moment in technology, in the same way the dot-com boom was, etc., etc., etc. I don't think this is sort of crypto 2.0, where
Or the metaverse.
or the metaverse is a great example of that. Absolutely. I don't think we're in that realm. Like, this is serious game-changing stuff. And it goes beyond Google AI overviews or my silly searches on ChatGPT. It absolutely does. But equally, I think we need to take a step back as well about kind of, for one thing, I always say I think people are going to take on and give more credence to human and clearly human created work in an age of growing AI slop. And I really very strongly feel that and say that in every time I have one of these discussions.
Yeah, and I suppose that's the core of it. So whenever there is an era of mechanization,
Right.
at any level, from the Industrial Revolution onwards, at some point you start to question, okay, well, when the machines can do this chunk of stuff, what is left for humans? And without getting too philosophical,
Please.
I think we have gone through.
We're recording this on early Monday afternoon. Please get philosophical.
I possibly need more coffee. We've gone through a phase where we've almost increasingly tried to make humans more like machines in the way we get them to work, and without being too rude, if you can think of online news publications that have turned many of their younger staff mainly into rewriting machines, write-throughs. So do a write-through of this story, i.e. rip off the story from another publication from our site. That is not a long-term viable job, because those sorts of things are going to be easily done by AIs.
Yeah.
And B, actually the need for that is almost completely going to be taken away, because if somebody just wants a quick summary of what's going on, AI is going to provide that in some way.
Beyond a Google AI overview, there's going to be more intelligent ways of doing that. Yeah, I entirely agree with you.
And those ways are going to develop. I think there's a degree of panic among the tech companies. They feel they have to get into this space. And so AI is being thrust into jobs it's not particularly good at, like being an answer engine, because generative AIs are essentially very good guessing engines. But like any time you're guessing, sometimes they get it dramatically wrong.
Yeah.
And we're trying to thrust them into their answer role, which is why I'm a little skeptical that we'll ever hit total
AGI.
Google Zero and things like that.
Yeah.
Because I think there will always be a role for searching for specific bits of information. But the core thing is, as more sort of simple information needs are met through AI, and increasing volumes of content out there are generated by AI of varying levels of trustworthiness, at some point, at least some people are going to have to seek something that's more trustworthy, something that they can understand the provenance of more clearly. And particularly, I cited in the piece you referred to, an acquaintance of mine, David Mattin, who is a sort of trend watcher.
Yeah.
And one of the things he always uses as his frame for looking at what a new technology is going to do is the idea that humans fundamentally don't change, even as technology does. So as technology changes, we just find...
We're still hunter-gatherers, are we?
Well, at some level, some of our behaviour patterns are like that. And we still need social connections. We are still social animals.
Yeah.
And that fundamental need for connection will remain important.
Yes, I mean, you do say about we're fundamentally social creatures. Loneliness is associated with both mental and physical problems. Arguably, it's comparable with cigarette use and alcohol abuse as a threat to your health, etc., etc. So we do want human connection and human interaction. We don't just want... we're not the people in Wall-E, are we, with the VR screens being whizzed around continually.
And yeah, a certain amount of stuff has moved online post-pandemic.
Sure.
But equally, a lot of things have gone back offline because people like being around other people.
And and actually I think people have given far more credence to, online, in-person events because we realised how much we missed them.
Yes, absolutely. When we were kept away from them for 18 months, 2 years.
Yeah.
It's made a difference.
You make a really interesting point that I want to slightly debate with you, which is
Okay.
news is not a fundamental human need. You write, is it useful? Yes. Does societies function better with good, unbiased reporting? Unquestionably, yes, but it's not a need. It's a nice to have, or possibly a very nice to have. Really?
Well, a lot depends on how you define news. So, again, if you want to go back to the hunter-gatherer metaphor, so news is, dangerous animal is going to kill you over there. Food that you can eat is over there. And arguably in that sense, news is a fundamental need. But it's a fundamental need that is supporting the really basic needs of humanity, which is social connection, which is food, which is shelter.
Yeah.
And if you like, this is what I'm trying to say. News is not something we all crave and need. And if you look at the news avoidance,
Oh, yeah,
right
absolutely.
now, that almost is clearly, yes, I mean, yes, there are mental conditions where people avoid food, but generally speaking, we need food. We have hunger.
Sure.
We have these basic human needs. So it's essentially working out where news fits into these deeper human needs. That's what I was trying to explore in that piece.
Right.
And I think effectively news fits in a journalism in the wider sense, because it's not just about news. Journalism in the wider sense fits in by A, helping communities function better, but also B, giving us information that allows us to function in these fundamental needs, if you like.
And the impact of AI. I mean, I do think news is, I certainly think it is essential to functioning societies and a functioning body politic.
I think we can all fairly easily point to examples of how the dilution of well-produced news in a sea of misinformation or opinion has created problems within many societies where there is deep internet penetration.
Yeah, exactly. And what's the role of AI in that discussion, in the sense of the essentialness of news, in the value of news?
Well, it's not so much about the role of AI, it's the role of humans. So if we accept that in the same way that the arrival of the web accelerated the amount of information available to us, the advent of generative AI is going to, again, further accelerate the overwhelming tide of information coming at us. The role of this fundamental human is, okay, what is the core need that we as journalists are serving? And therefore, how can we express that in a way that is not going to be just replaced by AI?
Right.
That's the fundamental thing. So if we accept this technology is coming, and we accept the most likely consequence of this, which is just a tidal wave of AI slop with some AI value in there coming at most of us.
Well, we're already getting that wave after wave after wave of slop content.
Absolutely. So in that context, what is left for us? And as human, where is the fact that we are human beings producing this rather than just fact checkers on AI output? Where does the value come in that?
Right, which is what I was getting at earlier.
Yes, which is like human connection, about making sure that. Sorry if that was a noise. My lights just fell over slightly.
Oh, perfect.
Apologies. So this is the point about sort of human connection and the sense of serving a community.
Right.
And one of the things I find very interesting is if you look at sort of emergent media. I keep thinking I should write something about Barry Weiss and the Free Press and what's happened with that being purchased.
We've all done it.
The problem is I don't really care very much, in the sense that yes, there is an independent media story there, but she was somebody who had a high profile to start with in a big news organisation. She came out and has gone back into a big news organisation, admittedly in a far more senior position and with far more power because of what she's done in the meantime. What I'm really interested in is where it's the sort of the current wave of emergent startup ones, particularly where a bunch of maybe slightly less profile journalists go up and start something and start building it. So 404 Media would be a great example. Perhaps a very recent example would be The Nerve, the 5 journalists from The Observer including Carol Cadwalla, who've set up their own thing, and they seem to be building subscribers at a fair old rate. And one of the things that I find interesting about them is that one of the things you see them increasingly adding into the mix you get if you subscribe to 404 Media, for example, is you get access to their members' Discord, and access to a community of like-minded folks. And I was having a conversation with somebody I was doing some training mentoring for recently. And one of the things I said about, one of the things we've discovered about sort of the public social media side of things is after a while, it's great fun going into the town forum. But then after a while, you get a bit bored being a space where people keep shouting at you for having different views of them. And occasionally you do want to retreat back to a space that's a more sort of a friendly community. And that's very natural. And I think there's a really interesting little slither of opportunity right now, in the sense that many of the big social media platforms are retreating from being social networks back to being social media. So if you look at something like Instagram, 5-10 years ago, that were mainly being pictures from your friends and contacts. And now it's increasing, you're getting loads of stuff from influencers and celebs pushed at you by the algorithm. They're becoming more social media in the sense of media publishable by people rather than social networks, which are about supporting connections between people. If you look at Meta's products across the ground, they're all moving in that direction. So as the networks move away from being networks to being media again, is there a role for us to sort of sneak back in and pick up the work we were doing 20 years ago, which was starting to build communities around the information we were producing? Now, at the time, I was working in the business press. So I was working at a B2B company, Read Information, as it was called, Read Business Publishing eventually, then Read Business Information. And we were doing a lot of work building communities around our journalism, spectacularly well on things like farmers and social workers, and to various
which does really matter in the B2B press.
Yes, absolutely, because the B2B press understood has to understand to survive that the people they are writing for are the people they are writing about most of the time, and and they are part of this sort of community of people. They play a very important role in that community, but they are deeply engaged with that community. Particularly one job I had, so I was part of the focus team on Estates Gazette, the commercial property magazine that had a near-death experience towards the end of last year. But my job was to literally travel around the country interviewing commercial property people in the different parts of the country and writing regional profiles of those things. And that was useful in itself because it brought in advertising revenue because people would advertise against these features. But I think one thing that I really appreciated at the time, but maybe the overall publishing team didn't, was how embedded this made Estates Gazette in the whole industry across the country. Because at least once a year, a journalist from Estates Gazette would turn up. They'd have interaction with them, they'd have a relationship. They'd get their focus in the magazine. Now, one particularly that stuck in my mind is I was once sat in a boardroom waiting to interview the senior partner. And as I looked around the walls of the boardroom, I realised there was something like 70 or 80 years of the magazine I was writing for in bound volumes around the walls, which made me feel a sort of sense of connection with that industry.
And that's what... And my argument would be AI, for all the good things it can undoubtedly do to improve efficiency, to improve productivity, it can't rebuild that.
Yeah, and actually, to just continue with my argument from the States Gazette, after I left, as things transitioned to digital, they lost a lot of that ad revenue in the magazine. So they basically, eventually, over a few years, completely unwound the section I used to work for. Didn't exist anymore. And I think in the medium term, they didn't realise that essentially they'd just given 80% of the country that didn't work in London a reason to stop buying the magazine. And to stop subscribing to the website. And they lost that sort of community connection because they were only seeing it as an ad get play.
Of course.
And I think that at least some level led to the near-death experience the magazine had towards the end of last year before Mark Allen Group bought it and resurrected it. And so thinking about that, okay, how can we not just participate in our communities, but actually be a hub around which the
Right.
community gathers. I sometimes talk about social object theory, the idea that communities online will gather around a social object. Actually, a great social object is news, is journalism, is
Sure.
information for that community. And it doesn't matter whether that is The Guardian and the social object is news for left-leaning people in the UK, or it's, I don't know, White Dwarf, information for people who like painting little fantasy and sci-fi figures and waging war
Right.
with them. They're all communities.
Yeah, and we do like, back to your original point about being part of human connection. We do want to be part. But then, do you come back to conclude that AI is not going to have the impact we sort of think it might, because that human element is going to withstand that?
It scales here, because there are certain sorts of things that AI is going to be very good at. And it is going to be very good at processing, synthesizing information from lots of sources. But it's not going to do that with fundamental understanding. It's going to do that on a probabilistic way. And there are lots of places where that stuff is really useful.
It's not going to do this thing that the hack who's been on the same desk for 25 years knows everyone on the beat that they write about.
Absolutely, and who understands context, and who understands history and can draw connections between these things. But AI can help support some of these things. Fundamentally, I don't think there's any reason why AI will sweep away journalism. But I do think that journalism needs to acknowledge the reality of what's coming and change to adapt. And any point where you are taking a human being and make them behave like a machine is probably somewhere, because the machine is going to be better at that than the human being is.
Right. Of course.
And so any point where you're doing that, you have a problem. And fundamentally, what I see is that we've actually created a weakness for ourselves, where we have, in certain places, pulled away from these community functions. I mean, local news would be a classic example, where, once upon a time, we'd have had people in the town you would actually meet, and these days they're sat in a content production hub in the latest, in big town, which may be 40 or 50 miles away, never actually seen in the town they're notionally writing about. Any sense of community connection is just gone. And that's the sort of thing that's incredibly vulnerable to something just scraping all the online sources about a town and producing something in an automated way.
Yeah, I entirely agree with you on that. And I think we're seeing, in some ways, the pushback on that. Lots of newsletters. I'm thinking Emily Sandberg's Feed Me, and there's a few other things where... So she's writing essentially about business in New York, but it's got that very gossipy take. People know she's walking and driving and eating and drinking in New York and talking to the people in the businesses she writes about, and it's very human and gossipy, and people like that.
10 years ago, when the Times moved over to their editions model,
they
did a whole bunch of research about what people really valued about the Times. And actually, one of the things that came out very strongly was it was the commentators, it was the known journalists, and the people were largely subscribing for that, because I suppose the idea was the Times' readers were fairly busy people. They are not people who are going to be lurking on social media the whole time. They might see that a news story has gone by on social media and then sort of mentally park it and say, I'll check out the Times.
But they want to read Danny Finkelstein's latest opinion piece.
Absolutely.
They want to read The Splash.
They trusted certain people to be the people who would explain it to them and contextualize it for them. So, at that point, the most simple bits of news, that sort of breaking news, that thing that is happening, has been incredibly commoditized since Twitter came along.
Sure.
Any news story that can be captured back in the day, 140 characters, was immediately commoditized because it just spread on Twitter like that.
Yeah.
And so where becomes the value is where you add analysis, context,
of course,
depth. And there was a very important trust relationship there. Arguably, that sort of independent newsletter economy, which you are part of and which we're touching on here, is part of that. You subscribe to newsletters the people whose way of expressing themselves, their thoughts and their personalities are most interesting to you.
Right. And can AI sweep that away?
I think it will
She
struggle.
asked nervously.
Yeah, I think it will struggle. AI will do various things, but there is that point of human connection to human connection. I sometimes, with my sort of training work, thinking about social media, use what I call the digital inverted pyramid, which is partially structured as an inverted pyramid to relax old journalists who get very comfortable when you start talking about inverted pyramids, but also because it genuinely works. And I sometimes think about social media as having three main components in journalism, one of which is broadcast, i.e. read my stuff, watch my
Yep.
stuff, listen to my stuff. Story finding, i.e. what marketing people would call social listening. Thinking about social media as a big database of people talking about stuff, finding the unanswered questions they've got, finding the stories, finding the user-generated content and verifying it and bringing it into our stories.
Yep.
But the third part is networking, and that's the bottom of the inverted pyramid, and the other two rest on them. You build connections through social media. You and I first met through social media, for example.
Yes.
And those networks develop over time. It's, in journalistic sense, it's just a new way of working the beat. So you go far enough back in time, and you can only work the beat by walking and using your feet, and then
Going into the right pub every evening. Yeah.
Or then you could write letters. Dear sir, I here tell that the following has occurred. Could you confirm?
Yeah.
And then, telephone, email, and social media allows you to maintain this sort of wider beat. The core thing is, it's not just about writing in a voice, but it's also being a sort of an accessible human being that people can interact with.
Yeah.
And we sort of understand this because in many ways, lots of discussion at the moment about the intersection between journalism and influencers. And I think that is an important part of it. But how can we...
We could do a whole other show on that.
We can, but it's related as an idea, which I'm going to touch on it briefly, if you don't mind. Which is the idea, how can we steal the best bits of influencer culture without corrupting what we do? Is basically
100%.
the question we've got. And the best bits of influencer culture is they acknowledge and seek to, if not directly interact with their audience, they create at least an illusion of interaction with their audience by talking directly to them, by periodically replying to stuff from the audience, feeling a sense that they actually pay attention to and care about the audience. And there are times in journalism where we almost take a pride in not doing that.
Because we are the mighty journalists in the mighty newsroom.
Yeah.
We know things and we're feeding it down to you civilians. I totally agree with that. You end your piece, if you don't mind me, the spoiler, by saying we can build a stage for a new renaissance of journalism in the 2030s, which is a really nice, positive way to end the sort of... I hear so much about sort of an AI apocalypse in media and journalism, and you clearly don't feel that. But where are we going to be in 5 years' time?
Okay, so I mean, I suppose I'm just tired. I've been hearing about the web apocalypse of journalism, or the social media apocalypse of journalism, or the mobile apocalypse of journalism, or the social video apocalypse of journalism. It's like journalism survives because I think journalism is adjacent enough to those fundamental human needs that people will always find a way of doing it. Right. It doesn't matter how much... So fundamentally, I don't think it matters how much the existing news organisations stumble and die. Journalism itself will, to quote Jurassic Park of all things, will find its way. But because people have not a deep fundamental need, but it's so adjacent to those fundamental needs that people will seek it and other people will seek to provide it. I think local news is a really good example of this because I'm being very intentionally not naming anyone, but I'm being slightly scathing about centralised production hubs and things like that.
I cannot imagine who you're thinking of.
It's a mystery, isn't it? We're really reaching for a solution here. But what I think is there's some part of me that believes unless something dramatic changes, that actually it's quite a good thing if some of the existing local news media companies just burn down, because they're creating that space for the really interesting startups to grow. And whether you look at the whole forest of them, including Jim Waterson's one in London, if you look at Mill Media doing it all across the UK, you see that stuff to me is really exciting and really interesting. It's a different
100%.
model of journalism, And a lot of it is very rooted in understanding the people there, what they care about, getting out there and interviewing core people. An AI is never going to be a good interviewer. That's just not what they are set up to do. And therefore, those sorts of fundamental journalism skills of being out there amongst people, finding the stories, building the connections between the people want to hear about and the things they want to hear. I think that's the exciting bit. I think that's something that can constantly regenerate. I don't think journalism is synonymous with the businesses that are doing it right now. And we see this all over the world. If you look at places in the world where the mainstream press are enslaved to the state in various ways or have been crushed by the state, and you see independent startup businesses, startup journalists, maybe under great threat to their lives, they still do it because the necessity of that journalism is still there. It's still adjacent, let's keep saying, these fundamental human needs. So I think journalism will always find a way. Our job is perhaps to just be a little bit more realistic than we've been in the past and say, actually, no, this is going to hit us. So let's actually try and build something that's a bit more resilient in our structure. That means we have these fundamental relationships. Okay, bugbear of mine, but
please,
I would argue that, arguably, a lot of people have argued the original sin of journalism in the 2000s was not charging for it. Don't necessarily agree completely because people tried, and there were some areas that succeeded and other places didn't. But maybe more people should have experimented more. For me, the sin of the 2010s was we let go of the relationship between ourselves and our audiences, and we let Facebook and, to a lesser extent, Twitter and certainly Google sit between us and our audiences. And because that traffic was so free and easy, relatively speaking, for so long, we just got used to it. And all the sort of community initiatives that some of us were working on in the 2000s got shelved. It's like, oh no, we'll just do a Facebook group. Oh no, we'll do a Facebook page.
Yeah.
Oh, we're on X. We don't care about the rest. Sorry, Twitter. We don't care about the rest of it. And I think that was a terrible mistake. And we had a decade where we could have been building relationships with our readers, taking the ones that came in via social, via search, and then making them our readers. And if we had done that, I think we'd be in a much better position to face the AI apocalypse than we are right now.
So, just to wrap up, what I'm getting from you is that really what we need to focus on in the next 5 years and going forward is owning those relationships. Yes,
absolutely.
AI might be a useful tool. In fact, it is going to be a useful tool.
Absolutely. But
the core thing to own is the relationship between producer and audience.
Yes. And I also think the other thing I think is there's going to be the real danger point for us is going to come in about 3 years' time. Maybe less, maybe more. But at some point, there's going to be a bit of an AI bust. I think that's inevitable. We're using AI for things it's not good at. There's going to be a backpull. Some of the companies are going to collapse because they're not going to be able to build revenues to back their valuations. And at that point, everyone's going to go, oh, it's going away. In the way that lots of people did around 2000. Oh, the internet's going away. It was not taken out. It will come back.
It ain't going away.
And it will come back much better because we'll have a better sense of what this tool is actually useful for then. And if we just fall back into our old habits next time the threat decreases a bit, then we've missed an opportunity, as we have done in the past.
It's been a fascinating conversation. I really agree with a lot of what you have to say on this. Head over to Adam's onemaninhisblog.com to read his full manifesto. I'll obviously link to it in the show notes as well. Adam, thanks so much for joining me. Remind people where they can come and connect with you.
Well, generally speaking, you can find anything from, as you say, One Man in His Blog. But on most social platforms, you will find me at Adders, Adders, which was a nickname given to me by the second editor I ever worked for. I tend to use it on social platforms.
And he's stuck with it ever since. I'm at Charlotte A. Henry across pretty much all social platforms. Obviously, I'd love you to head to theedition.net, subscribe. It helps keep that human connected, independent journalism we've just been talking about. And of course, you are, and I deeply appreciate it. And I have a new book out. Streaming Wars is out in the UK and lots of other countries right now. It will be out in a few days' time if you're listening to this in the United States. It comes out at the 28th of October over in the US. So I would love you dearly if you also bought a copy of that. I hope you find it interesting. Adam, thank you.
Stunning coincidence. There's a copy on the table behind her. If you're watching,
I don't know how it. I just don't know how it got there.
Mystery again, isn't it?
No idea how that got there. But yes, I hope you read and enjoy that book. Adam, thank you once again for joining me. I'll see you all next week.